Hey fellow netizens, Plus here. So, you want to visit Terra, a world we have only experienced at the tip of our finger, a world where a kingdom of chivalry and knighthood could turn into a corporate dystopian, where god-conquering China and the demon power-wielding Soviet Union don't quite get along, a world where angelic people were liberated through sweets and guns, where their ancient brethren are the most discriminated against amongst all races. Terra is probably one of the most complex and realistic fictional worlds I've ever consumed, and I choose the word consume not because I like it is because Arknights is not just a game, it is a glorified visual novel with absurdly high production costs, along with a ton of adjacent media to enrich its own characters and world building, such as the character theme, songs that only exist outside of the game, official posts. Some are more cryptic than others, but all of them share the same trait, that is the exploration of the world of Terra from a unique angle or different timeline. ARG, aka alternate reality game, is also an adjacent element that exists in Arknights media, which has hidden pieces of lore. Even web event and manga that cover small but important details can solidify the world building. The world of Arknights has been evolving ever since the game was released back in 2019. Countless main and side stories have been added throughout the years. More than 1.6 million words make up the total of the readable media in Arknights, or in other words, it would take an average person over 90 hours to read through all of it. You can also view the entire lore of Arknights as 4 times the entirety of the Lord of the Rings. But what actually makes a great world building? What actually makes us want to visit Terra, despite the fact that all of us know how hazardous, apocalyptic and dystopian Terra really is? Are we at zero sanity? A world doesn't just pop up out of nowhere with all of its different nations. People don't just magically have specific traits for no particular reason. A nation doesn't wage war against one another just for the thrill of it, otherwise it would feel very unnatural. What makes the world building of Arknights so fascinating is how they have both otherworldly fantasy elements and realistic conflicts between people and nations at the same time, as if the game has stripped out one of the cruelest sections from our history books and put it into a fantasy world. It is probably the closest of world building to the likes of Game of Thrones, with all the different nations and their conflicts, how the history of some nations still haunts them in the present day, how some past events are connected with present international affairs, how certain nations used to be superpower but fell into obscurity, how there are world-ending threats but nobody gives a fuck about because everyone is busy dealing with their own shit. As you can see, the world building of Arknights is quite complicated and one can easily lose themselves in this giant labyrinth, which is why to make the visit to this god-forsaken world more attractive, I've made this guide video to travel through every nation, to take a deep dive into each nation's unique history while admiring their sightseeings. Why? Because you clicked on this video, because you are curious, because you want to visit Terra. Although before we go, there are 4 basic but very important things that you need to hear. The world of Arknights has a lot of similarities with our world. However, there are a few things which make Terra a lot more different, despite its similarities in culture and nations. The main energy source for almost every nation is a dark crystalline substance called originium. Originium is often found in nature, in the aftermath of big catastrophes, or grows on living beings. There are 3 places on Terra where the density of originium is extremely high. These spots are called prime veins, and only a few nations can claim to be truly profiting from those. Why that is because originium is often found in a very active state. It is flammable, explosive, and can even grow over time, if not contained correctly. This leads us to the second big factor on Terra, catastrophes. Just like in our world, catastrophe is nature's wrath in its purest form. Earthquakes, sandstorms, floods, blizzard, and meteor showers, to just name a few. In the world of Arknights, the word catastrophe is branded with a different kind of fear. These are oftentimes way bigger and more destructive than the catastrophes in our world. Catastrophes on Terra can easily wipe out an entire city within a day, and even if you somehow survive it, you are likely not going to survive the aftermath of it. As I mentioned earlier, active originium can be found right after a big catastrophe. Why is active originium bad? This leads us to the third point, getting infected. An incurable disease known as oropathy. If you get in contact with active originium, you are likely to get infected. Originium density will slowly become denser in your blood circulation. After a long time, solid crystals would grow inside your body and eventually even on your skin, causing great pain to the point of the inability to move or breathe. Aside from all of these negative traits, infected people don't need to use a magic medium to cast art. Oh right, arts is the magic system on Terra, also known as originium arts. In some nations it is akin to magic, while in others it is viewed as a scientific field. But on the grimmer side, infected people experience great prejudice. Some nations mistreat them worse than others. There are places where they send them to forced labor camps, while other states prohibit them from practicing specific work or entering certain areas. The crystal on the host's body grows even after death. I wonder what we can do with those crystals. It sure would be a waste to throw them away. Anyway, you are definitely wondering how civilizations can even survive in such a harsh environment, a world filled with never-ending catastrophes, incurable diseases, and dangerous but profitable resources. How do nations manage to survive, let alone prosper in this world, to the point to even have golden ages or become world-dominating superstate? Well, in the world of Arknights, it is a common practice to build cities on gigantic moving platforms. These are being dubbed nomadic cities. These nomadic cities can avoid being in the center of an approaching catastrophe by relocating itself in time. This is only possible on Terra because of the tremendous amount of energy originium can provide. Now that I have told you the basics of this world, we will be heading right into it. Our first stop is Ursus, aka You Are Sus. Actually it means bear, since the majority of its population are Ursine. In the ancient times, the nation was known as the Empire of Hippogriff, but the old Tsar was overthrown due to the elites' racist behaviors towards the lower class, which were primarily the Ursine people. After the coup, the nation was filled with pride and nationalism, which was the perfect combination for world domination. So, the newly proclaimed Ursus Empire started to expand westward to gain more land and resources to fuel their continued expansionism, and while they were at it, they also oppressed small tribes and nations along the way. There was nothing the Ursus Empire hadn't fought against throughout their history of conquest: mythical godlike beings, demons from the north, and knights with guns. The only nation that proved to be a real obstacle was Casimir's, the land of the knights. Nonetheless, the Ursus Empire proved themselves to have the strongest military amongst all nations, by expanding so much that it has become the biggest nation on Terra, even to this day. They really loved to throw spears at their enemies, having the tankiest defenders to stop anyone from making a dent into their positioning, while mortars can attack from afar, and artillery targeteers made sure the artillery hit every single one of their targets until they died, a very miserable death. The army of Ursus spread fear all across Terra quite equally, by not only killing foes but also their own civilians. The testimony of Terra during Ursus' strength heyday goes like this. 5 groups of shieldmen can slaughter a squad of knights, 4 royal guards can wipe a settlement off the map, 3 Wendigos can conquer a small town, 2 army groups can decimate a duchy, 1 sovereign can throw the world into chaos. And this is excluding their most feared soldiers, the Emperor's Blade. They are literally the blade of the Tsar and would execute His Majesty's will at any given time. These fellows covered in mask use a demon power in combination with their near inhuman capabilities in combat, and are mostly feared for their dark farts. If you see one, they might start a conversation like this: "Take my advice, kill yourself." But with great power comes great responsibility, and that wasn't Ursus' strength. They usually put the people from newly conquered nations into their gulags. Their own citizens aren't treated any better, because most of their resources go into its military effort. The Ursus population lived in a poor condition, and just like in the old days, the Ursus revolted, again, this time putting an end to the brutal military regime. All of this happened because none of the elites really learned anything from history. I mean, why learn from history when you can just repeat it? Anyway, the new rebellion brought big changes. Now all Ursine are equal, but some Ursine are more equal than others. Ursus has turned from an expansionist nation into a more open and conservative one. Its new ruling class are a new generation of intellectuals and royalties who seek to modernize the nation. This does sound pretty good, right? So what do you think the Ursus of today would look like? Well, it still inherits a strong nationalism, and the discrimination against the infected has gotten even worse ever since the incident in Chernobyl. Basically, an infected group called Reunion rallied together to riot, took over the entire nomadic city of Chernobyl and drove towards Lungmen. When I heard the news, this was my honest nuclear reaction. Oddly enough, even after the city was lost, it was still sending out a strong signal that it belonged to the Ursus Empire. Sounds like a skill issue to me. I bet it was simply a malfunction when Reunion took it over. Let's move on to our next stop, the Great Yen. What's up, Beijing? Welcome to the Great Yen, one of the oldest nations on Terra. It is an imperial monarchy ruled by an emperor, and there are 6 ministries. As one of the oldest nations, Yen has preserved all of its traditional culture from its prehistoric dynasties and is now on their way to fully embrace modernization. Their gigantic agricultural nomadic city, 𝙏𝙤𝙪𝙧𝙜𝙪, which is able to feed almost the entire population of Yen on its back, and their international financial powerhouse Lungmen are just a few shining examples of Yen's way to progress and prosper. In fact, Yen has been known as one of the most stable nations on Terra, since it never really got involved in any warfare with other nations throughout its entire history. Yen would also send out envoys to neighboring nations to settle war-related matters, of course with the attempt to achieve its own political agenda. Aside from the stable and peaceful land, Yen is also known for its unwavering economic monopoly in the world of Terra. The Lungmen dollar, a currency that is very widely accepted amongst all around Terra, simply because of its stability. It is so widely used that it is being viewed as Terra's main currency. But Yen wasn't always like this. Before the dawn of the Common Era, Yen was ruled by merciless gods, also known as Pharaoh-moods. Always in awe and terror, these Pharaoh-moods reigned over the people of Yen with their miracle-creating powers that just bent over the laws of nature effortlessly. But the emperor had a dream. He wanted the humans to govern for themselves. One day, Yenese scholars found bones of ancient Pharaoh-mood corpses. Were these dead Pharaoh-moods similar to their rulers? Did they had any connections with them? Nonetheless, one thing was clear to the current emperor: their masters were not so immortal after all. So he decided to plot an assassination against his own deities. This act was then dubbed as the Great Hunt by Terra historians of the modern era. They used ancient rituals as an excuse to gather all the heavenly beings to one spot, to kill them all at once. To do so, the emperor secretly gathered the biggest army around the deities, and they started the slaughter by killing the weakest first. The slaughter turned into a full-scale war between man and god, and it looked really bad for Yen. But in the midst of it all, one of the Pharaoh-moods, Sui, the one closest to humans, decided to fight against his brethren. This was the turning point of the war, but in actuality, Sui's true intentions was very selfish. He wanted to rule over Yen alone by helping the emperor to slay every single one of his brethren until none was left, and while the Yenese army was exhausted from all the fighting, he would take the chance and strike when they were at their weakest. However, the emperor was aware of the plan and prepared countermeasures beforehand. Basically, the Great Hunt was a backstabbing contest to see who can backstab the most. I bet even Sui forgot on whose side he was fighting anymore, and ever since that day, Yen was known as the nation that slayed gods. Sui was not completely defeated though. He was split into 12 fragments, 12 weaker Pharaoh-moods, so to say. Each of them have their own ideals, their own personality, and their own unique autism. Nien, a spice-loving extrovert who can create anything from weapons to entire nomadic cities out of thin air. She also makes shitty movies and likes to be around places where big things happen. Dusk, probably the best shot-in waifu you can wish for, because she is so socially awkward that she only interacts with her painting, quite literally. She has made a world through her painting. Once you enter this world, it really makes you wonder who is real. There are only two kinds of introvert, the oh no people guy and the ew people guy. She belongs to the later specimen. In Twilight's Embrace, Ling takes her place. She is the most mature one compared to the other two sisters, a strategist with wisdom and grace. With pen in hand, she crafts her rhyme. A poet who bends both space and time. Her goblet filled, she drinks with ease, yet her mind remains sharp, like a breeze. Drunk or sober, none can tell, for in her dreams she casts a spell. Reality raps at her command, in a world where dragons stand. Enemies falter, lost in her sway, as Ling leads the drunk dance, night and day. Forever poised, forever keen, she's always Bing Qiling. Chongyue, he is the world's strongest kung fu fighter. Through his immortal life, he has mastered all the fighting styles. People know him primarily for doing nothing but working out and training. Dude is literally living his artistry to its fullest. We have turned all of his techniques into consumable copy pasta. Shu, welcome to the rice field, motherfucker, for we will be harvesting these crops. Here is where we people sow. She is the flattest mother figure, but definitely not the least fertile. She is the sole reason why Yen is able to feed its growing population. Let's finally take a look at Yen in our current day and age. Thanks to Yen's geographical location, it is far away from the Terran heartland, which means it never gets involved in any bloody conflict between the many nations there. Throughout the centuries, it had its consistent population growth and resources to prosper, which is why it has become a laid-back superpower on Terra by simply minding its own business. In addition, some of the 12 fragments of Sui are helping the Yen Empire to prosper. Nian can build the empire whatever they need. Whether it is new nomadic cities for the growing population, or walls ranging through an entire nation border to defend threats from the north, to Nian it is all a very trivial task. Shu, on the other hand, is the one making sure that the agriculture flourishes every year so that the growing population is getting fed. Chongyue has been training the Yenese soldiers for as long as he has gained consciousness and defended threats from the north. What that threat exactly is will be covered in part 2. Ling. What did she actually contribute to Yen? She was a great strategist who also defended Yen from northern threats, that's for sure. But she mostly did philosophical thinking and sophisticated drinking. After all, philosophy is best viewed through a lens made from the bottom of an empty bottle. And thus is a competitive hikikomori, nothing more, nothing less. All in all, Yen has managed to turn a few of the 12 fragments on their side, and is using them as multiple cheat codes in their Civilization 6 session. But not every fragment is working so obediently under the Yen government. There are a few other fragments lurking in the shadows, working against the current regime. Every year, one of them would come out and play a game of 𝙀𝙤 against the Emperor, and if he wins, he gets to go out into the land and spread chaos. Honestly, if it were by me, I'd just have flipped the table. Their endgame is to bring all 12 fragments together, so they can revive the Sui once more. This is extremely concerning, because if Sui gets revived, it is likely going to turn Yen upside down, and might even become a world-ending threat. It is what I'm worried about. It's definitely not because we would lose all 12 waifus and husbandos if Sui is completed. Why would I even think that? Anyway, if we are traveling through the Great Yen, then there is one place we simply cannot miss out on, and that is Lungmen, the economic powerhouse of Yen. It is a gigantic nomadic city that has special financial perks which benefits Yen's total economical growth. Its modernized super metropolis is anything but traditional. You can find the most hip clothing brands from all across Terra, from giant districts of world-renowned companies such as Raytheon, Rhinelab, and Mama John's, to totally trustworthy detective agency. There is anything in this restless city. A city where you can witness an epic rap battle between a rat and a penguin, a place where you can have a date with your rat girlfriend in a Yenese restaurant enjoying a hot xiaolongbao. Lungmen is one of the places where diversity flourishes. Oh, and when we are talking about diversity, they are just not so keen with the infected, but hey, I mean, they would simply ruin the business and prestigious image of the city, so it is totally understandable. If you wonder where all the infected went, well honestly, you are asking the wrong person. but if I take a guess, they are probably living somewhere at the outskirts of the city, places where people wouldn't see them. Conveniently, nobody would notice a thing if they die by the hundreds. Anyway, enough with the minor inconveniences of using Originium. Let's look at the bright side, and with that I mean let's look at the different nation handling it. If it appears like a company, acts like a company, and smells like a company, then it is a company. Rimbilliton is a corporatocracy primarily known for its booming Originium mining industry. Its nature mostly consists of outbacks and deserts with its primary population of cultists. The birth of Rimbilliton was thanks to the age of colonization. Back in the days, the area was discovered to be close to one of the three prime vein, which consists of rich Originium sources. Every powerful nation sends their best expedition teams and mining companies in an attempt to claim the land for themselves. In the midst of the Originium rush, the political situation between the superpowers in the Terran heartland began to brickle, which made them shift their focus back on their homeland. The expeditioners and companies were all left to govern for themselves. What looked like a grim reality was actually a blessing in disguise, because at that time they bonded together, formed a nation by declaring their sovereignty to all other countries. Of course, none of the superpowers in the Terran heartland would accept that without attempting to overthrow the Billetonian government for a takeover, but because they were too busy with their own war games at that time, they could only send small forces to harass Billetonians. The superpowers met aggressive reactions and were repelled time and time again, until they finally learned their lesson and backed away. Well, except for Victoria, they are still trying to take control over the mining industry of Rimbilliton and insert their sovereignty, and Billetonians were like, nice opinion, one small issue, I am Bunny. British felines, they are too full of themselves, even now. Don't worry, we will get into that too. Rimbilliton is still a self-governing corporatocracy, just less racist and more corporate. It has quadrupled its mining operations, however, with more Originium mining comes more Originium risks. A large portion of Rimbilliton's population are in fact infected. But worry not, because Rimbilliton doesn't treat the infected as bad as Ursus, since they are aware that working in Originium mines would easily result in getting uropathy, so they don't discriminate against the infected. Not from an ethical perspective at least, but from a corporate perspective. They are discarded if they can no longer provide value to the mining companies. Usually the infected would still get a big paycheck that can last them for a few months. Good luck finding a new job as an infected, I would say. Next stop is going to be a place that is known for its sportsmanship, home to chivalry and entertainment, a place that is near light. Welcome to Casimir's, the land of the knights. We talked about Casimir's before. They were one of the only obstacles for Ursus' conquest. So, let's get to know the real deal. Casimir's is basically Poland, if being a horse knight wielding arts makes you OP. A nation inhabited mostly by horse people, aka Kurantas. They occupied the vast grassland in the Terran heartland and is governed by a confederation of knight groups. The classical way to distribute power fairly amongst the governing organs of a nation, you could say it is a bit closer to democracy. Other nations like to refer to Casimir's as the land of the knights and just. Ever since the beginning of Casimir's history, it has been a place where the strong protected the weak, a place where chivalry and justice blossomed. But this nation did come with its own challenges. In its whole history, Casimir's has faced countless brutal invasions from foreign powers, and it always questioned their ideology. Centuries ago, it was the Hippogriff Empire that never ended their harassment. These were actually quite easily repelled, and they eventually stopped trying to harass at Casimirian borders. And then came the Naimoran Khaganate, aka the Terran Genghis Khan. They beat the Hippogriff Empire to submission first, and were after Casimir's as a side dish. Hence, while the Hippogriff Empire stopped the harassment, it wasn't because they didn't want to. It was because the great Khagan annihilated them. Khagan had a vision. He wanted to conquer the world. Now, how do I explain this so that modern people like you would get it? It was a coming-of-age tradition for all Nightmoran tribes to go into uncharted places and bring back extraordinary tales to tell for their tribesmen. The great Khagan simply took it to an extreme level. He wanted to conquer everything. So, the great Khagan and his Knight-Moran horde effortlessly beat the Casimirian knight army into submission. The governing knight group, the Pegasus, kneeled before the great Khan and arranged a peace negotiation. This was one of the most humiliating chapters in Casimir's history. Majority of its population grew extremely dissatisfied with the ruling Pegasus and eventually united under the goal to remove them from their position of influence. The revolt started when the Knight-Moran campaign came to an abrupt end, with the sudden death of the Khagan in the far south. All went successful, and the new political system demanded the knight to split their power and influence in a different way. They kept their political power, but had to turn a large portion of their wealth over to retinues. These people are referred to as merchants. They were given the task to manage the wealth. This went wrong in so many ways. The nation lived through a peaceful era in which the merchants grew more influential by the year, and by the time the nation formed a democratic system, the merchants had become such a powerful entity that they were able to control the economy of the nation. Merchants were always seen as lower-class citizens in the eyes of the knights, but now that the merchants have banded together to become one powerful and wealthy entity, they can no longer be ignored by the governing knight groups. The power struggle between the corporate faction and the governing knights was very polarized. The knights were in full control of the military, while the merchants had control over the economy of the nation. But one small factor broke the status quo. It was a calm Saturday afternoon. A hairless knight noble was holding an auction in hopes to sell his castle on a nomadic platform to the highest bidder. He invited his other noble friends. One after another, everyone placed their bet. But to everyone's surprise, it was not a nobleman that would offer the highest bid. It was his own retinue. This was very inspiring to the merchants. Why don't we just buy off the knights' land and military? They can't outbid us all. The knights had to renegotiate with the now powerful merchants and formed a new governing entity, the Casimir's General Chamber of Commerce, in short KGCC. This was a sad day for the knights, but a good day for the merchants, and a good day for people like us who love to spend money and consume. Everything has to be centered around making money. The first nation that is taking capitalism as their motto was born. Money ruled the nation. The knights only had one option: become a gear of the gigantic corporate machine. With this big change came the biggest shift in culture of Casimir's. The nation has slowly but gradually abandoned their tradition. It is all about stonks and profit. War with a neighboring nation can solidify its own economic growth if it means sacrificing a large portion of its own knights. No more knights on the street, only dubstep, Casimirian dubstep. The sound of capitalism and soulless consumerism is what makes up the Casimirs of today. Man has forgotten true struggle, as well as those who require it to survive. The last knight left in this country has abandoned the nation in an attempt to slay the ocean. I think he went crazy after all that happened. But what about the good old tradition? What about being a noble knight and fighting for justice? Would the good people of Casimir's really forget about all the heroism and chivalry? Would they forget about all the sacrifices the knights have committed to protect this land? Of course not, because knight sport is the best way to show the world that Casimir's is indeed still the nation of knights. Introducing the Major. It is the biggest sport event on Terra, held every 3 years in the capital of Casimir's. See it as a tournament arc where participants are organized into teams referred to as knight clubs. Successful clubs can be promoted to knight orders, but must maintain their performance to avoid demotion. It is simple, just keep on winning and you will never be forgotten. Independent knights can also compete, but are generally at a disadvantage compared to knights from well-funded clubs. High-performing knights in the Major may earn titles and get sponsorships from all sorts of established brands and prestigious titles, such as the Blood Knight, the Black Knight, or the Radiant Knight. Like I said before, this tournament is the personification of knighthood, the peak of Casimir's. It is the best thing they can offer. Every time a major event is held, the capital would dock with 3 other nomadic cities nearby to get more visitors and to make the major event even more unforgettable. because in the recent decades, the Major has become one of the most anticipated sports events for people from all across Terra. It simply cannot be ruined by infected people on the streets, which is why they are forced to be relocated into dark city alleys where foreign visitors wouldn't spot them, where the infected would be set out into harsh environment and starve. They would get so hungry they'd eat a The Major is the flagship of the 𝙀𝙤𝙪𝙧𝙬𝙪's economy. They bring in big investment, huge profit from merchandise, cosplay costumes, and a ton of revenue from advertisements. Knights are celebrated like superstars. They obtain more money and fame than any knights from the previous era, and that is what 𝙀𝙀𝙪𝙧𝙬𝙪 is all about. Congratulations, 𝙀𝙀𝙪! You went from chivalry to capitalism. Instead of raising the sword as a shield, they raised the sword for entertainment and profit. Maybe justice never existed in the first place. Well, that's enough for the nation of knights and capitalism. Let's take a visit to a nation that is still deep rooted with classical culture and studies into its own past. Welcome to 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀, the land of arts and music. 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀 is a superpower in the Terran heartland. Most of its inhabitants are classical music-loving Arknights. The nation is ruled by a rigid governing system of different Kreise, with 2 empresses as their acting leaders. This is the nation with an aggressive-sounding tongue and the longest swear word on Terra.
Donaudampfschifffahrtsgesellschaftskapitänswitwenversorgungskassen Mitarbeiter.
However, they aren't by any means aggressive. They have the finest music concerts and historically longest study into the field of arts. In fact, their past ruler was once titled the most talented arts user on Terra. But please refrain from spelling his name or title. Don't ever do that, it brings bad luck. 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀 is also known for preserving and innovating classical music. And by innovating, I'm not talking about new orchestra pieces to enjoy. Well, they do that too, but I think you will understand it once I show it to you. This is how a battle with Ursa's army looks like. This is how a battle with 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀's knights looks like. And this is how a battle with 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀 army looks like. Careful of music on the battlefield, especially when you face a 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀. Do you hear what I'm talking about? While other nations turn the battlefield into a bloodbath, 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀 turns the battlefield into an orchestra. 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀 arts is unique because centuries ago they combined sound with art, and today they have mastered it, turning music into weapons. And you know what the best thing is? They are one of the few nations that don't discriminate against the infected, allegedly. They treat them like brothers and sisters. They only discriminate against those who can't use arts. Infected people are sent into special facilities for neuropathy treatment. Well, the only drawback is that we don't get to see their infected family members once they are sent there, but knowing that they are being treated is good enough, right? Don't ask where the infected went. I'm sure they are all living peacefully in their facilities and getting treated. I mean, what would a nation with the highest knowledge about arts do to those poor infected anyway? Doing research on them? Using them as arts amplifier? Come on, we are not talking about Colombia. Anyhow, as one of the culturally richest nations on the Terran heartland comes with some unique attractions that we simply cannot miss out on. Zwillingstürme, the capital of 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀, a cultural heritage that is the Altstadt on this nomadic platform with their annual musical festival celebrating its liberal mindsets and harmonious prosperity, is a blessing for the eyes and ears. Wiesheim, a town famous for its music education and manufacturing of instruments. Everyone loves music in this town. In its center lies the Afterglow Hall, one of the most infamous places where musicals and orchestras are performed. This place used to be the arts amplifier of Terra's most powerful caster. And yes, I did say this place. He turned this entire building into his magical wand after all. Rumors even say that he turned the entire town in his arts medium. Now, what exactly did he use the arts medium for? That's a great question. We will get into that in a bit. But before that, let's have a history lesson about 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀, how it became what it is now, to be more precise, the true story of the strongest caster on Terra. Here is 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀 in the year of 969. Everything is as is. The nation is ruled by different Kreise. Kreise are the equivalent of states. Each Kreis has their own way of governing their subjects, but all Kreise are bound by the 𝙀𝙤𝙞𝙪𝙧𝙜𝙪 Gesetz. An arts contract. Imagine a magical contract that makes the Kreise and their Kurfürsten physically and mentally impossible to divide into sovereign nations. Other states can join the 𝙀𝙤𝙪𝙧𝙜𝙪 Gesetz, and their state's name would be written on the arts contract. Small reminder, joining the Kreise is easy, but leaving is virtually impossible, simply because of the complexity of the arts contract. And this is how Lithuanian acts as a single nation. The nation itself is united under a strong arts contract. Every few years, the Kurfürsten of every Kreis would come together and vote for one noble ruler worthy to take up the role of the acting emperor. They shall govern the nation and make all the Kreise prosper. In actuality, it is still the Kreise and their nobles who held the real power, because they can keep the emperor's influence if they want to. In a way, the nation is officially united, but doesn't quite act like a united nation. For example, each Kreis has their own military that only acts under the order of their own Kurfürst. Of course, if the entire nation is at war, then the emperor would request the unification of the forces of all armies, but even then, the head of the Kreise still has control over their own army. I know it is confusing, but that's just a fraction of Lithuanians' old and rigid bureaucracy. This is Otto Dietmar Gustav von Urtica. He was a young and good lad, extremely gifted in music and arts. Dude was practically listening to the Bible in Viennese on the right ear and listening to all 600 classical Lithuanian music pieces at 2 times the speed on the left ear, and he mastered all these music pieces in the span of 3 months. A prodigy child who also had the chance to get taught by the Kazdelian Lord of Liches. This is definitely gonna turn into a great relationship. However, Otto wasn't satisfied by all the knowledge he had gained. He looked way further into the future with an even bigger ambition than all of his peers. Every other nation was progressing relentlessly, while Lithuanian was still holding on to its same old music and arts from centuries ago. And let's not forget its complicated political system that makes changes hard to begin with. The 𝙀𝙤𝙪𝙧𝙜𝙪 Gesetz turned out to be a hindrance. Syracusa, one of the Kreise, has been voicing out its independence for decades, but the arts contract wouldn't let it happen, which turned into countless civil unrest inside Syracusa Kreis. What is going to happen to Lithuania in the next 20 or 30 years? Victoria has their steam knights, Iberia has made a pact with an advanced ocean civilization, and Ursus was becoming the new military powerhouse simply with their sheer brute force. Meanwhile, Lithuanian is still too stubborn to progress and can't handle its inner conflicts. Otto was already thinking 2 steps ahead, and with the unknown future of his beloved nation, he vowed to become the greatest ruler ever, once he gets his chance to sit on the throne.
Ob du meine Arbeit für richtig hältst, ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin, dass ich gearbeitet habe, dass ich mich in diesen Jahren für dich eingesetzt habe, dass ich anständig meine Zeit verwendet habe im Dienste meines Volkes. Gib du jetzt deine Stimme ab? Wenn ja, dann tritt für mich ein, so wie ich für dich eingetreten bin.
And thus he was chosen by the Kreise. First, he revamped the old rigid system. The Kreise and their Kurfürsten gradually lost their political influence, while he centralized power for himself. Now, any normal person would look at this and criticize his abuse of power, especially the Kreise and their Kurfürsten, but not with Otto's regime. Not only did he say goodbye to the old system, he also brought to the common folk a prosperity they have never seen before, all thanks to his Majesty's wisdom and knowledge. Soon enough, he earned himself the title 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀, the Horn of Genesis. But the most astonishing feat was him ending the political unrest of the Kreis Syracusa. 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀 single-handedly managed to override the 𝙀𝙤𝙪𝙧𝙜𝙪 Gesetz and removed the name Syracusa from the contract, officially declaring the Syracusa as an independent nation, something no one believed to be possible. And for the next decades, he went on ruling over Lithuanian. Everyone celebrated the rise of 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀, and he would go into history as the greatest ruler of Lithuanian. If it were not for the atrocities he had committed in the coming decades. Remember the Kreise and their Kurfürsten? They actually hated him. I know, right? Shocker. They lost their army, their influence, and their tradition. So to restore the glory of the good old 𝙀𝙤𝙪 custom, they tried to stir civil unrest. Basically, they disobeyed 𝙀𝙀𝙪's order and were punished accordingly. The punishment for dissidents was cruel. 𝙀𝙀𝙪's leadership got worse from that point onwards. To expose and punish the opposing Kurfürsten, he enacted a group of loyalists who served as his personal secret police all over 𝙀𝙀𝙪. At the same time, a dedicated group of cult-like loyalists was gradually formed around him. They were drawn to His Majesty's madness like a moth drawn by a candle. Normal citizens could only see his cruel actions, and he was eventually coined a new title, the Witch King. While the Witch King was busy killing off his political opponents, he became a professional hikikomori, not because he became awkward around people, it was because he was too invested in his arts research. It was like an obsession, as if he was close to finding the truth behind this world. One night, he took a large dose of extra-dimensional substance to gain new knowledge. He ascended into a realm outside of reality and saw things that he would call the truth. The Witch King returned as a different person. He yaps about willing to do whatever it takes to prevent the looming end of this world by killing the creator personally. He became much more secretive about his research and a lot crueler when it comes to dealing with dissidents. The treatment for the infected got worse. While treatment facilities have practically turned into his research facilities, the Witch King started doing countless arts and Originium related research. To keep up with his demand, his loyal followers delivered him infected citizens to experiment on. If you got infected during the reign of the Witch King, you have automatically become His Majesty's arts amplifier. Population of an entire town was found dead simply as a result of his art experiment. He also openly executed his political opponents by turning them into statues. The fear forever petrified to remind the common folk and his political opponents who the real boss was. The Witch King also spread his influence outside of 𝙀𝙀𝙪 by following the colonialism trend of other superpowers such as Victoria. The Witch King took over control of Bolivar by establishing a puppet regime that followed his orders. Soon enough, the Gaulish Empire, the most powerful and influential nation in the Terran heartland during that period, proposed to turn 𝙀𝙀𝙪 into their vassal state. Trust me, they asked the Witch King very nicely and were definitely not full of themselves. It was the worst time to send out such a bold message, but the Witch King did not turn the envoys down. He turned them into statues and sent them back to Gaul, officially declaring war. This war will go into history as the Gallo-𝙀𝙀𝙪 War. At the beginning of the war, 𝙀𝙀𝙪 took massive L's from Gaul. Not only did the Gaulish army breach deeply into 𝙀𝙀𝙪's soil, they also took over 4 Kreise in the span of 4 months. However, all of this was simply because the Witch King did not participate in the war personally. He did show up eventually by greeting the Gaulish army with his artificially created catastrophe, which single-handedly wiped out the entire warship fleet. And now you know what the Witch King used Wiesheim's Afterglow Hall for. It was a weapon of mass destruction. It brought such destructive power that Gaulish generals had to revisit their strategy, and as if that wasn't bad enough, Victoria and Ursus decided to join the war to bully Gaulish Empire while they were at the bottom and help 𝙀𝙀𝙪 win the war. All 3 superpowers bullied Gaul into extinction. Victoria and Ursus took the most spoil out of the war, leaving 𝙀𝙀𝙪 in ruin. Since the war mostly took place on 𝙀𝙀𝙪's soil, and when peace was restored, the Witch King returned to his cruel tyranny and shut himself away inside his spire. At this point, the people in 𝙀𝙀𝙪 had enough of his reign. The Kurfürsten revolted against the Witch King. With the help of their carefully crafted secret weapon, whom even the Witch King had no idea about, these 2 brave wife materials breached through the defenses of the Witch King and at last managed to slay him. The fateful day will forever be marked as the liberation of 𝙀𝙀𝙪 and celebrated as the September-Aufstand. The 2 who slayed their majesty have become the new official rulers and are known as the Twin Empresses. The Witch King's spire was torn apart. From its remnants, a twin tower was built, and the capital was renamed after it, Zwillingstürme. And that is how the tale of the Witch King ended, and how 𝙀𝙀𝙪 stepped into the modern age. Let's have another look at the 𝙀𝙀𝙪 of today, now that we have visited its past. The twin empresses have re-established the influence and bureaucratic system of the Kreise and their Kurfürsten. The infected are being sent to treatment facilities and usually never seen again. Congratulations, Lysanian, after 100 years we have come full circle, absolutely fantastic and most praiseworthy. Nowadays it is forbidden to refer to the previous ruler as the Witch King, and the name is simply a taboo. Only artworks and stage plays that depict His Majesty's downfall and demonizes him are allowed to be published, while the new ruling empresses are doing their best to restore Lysanian to its former glory. And remember when I talked about the cult-like people who gathered around the Witch King? The remaining loyalists of the Witch King were left with one motivation to keep them going: the revival of their beloved leader and restoration of his reign, for he is and will always be the true ruler of Lysanian. Some people will forever live in the fear of the past, while others strive to create the past glory by studying into the forbidden arts of their previous ruler, resulting in further meaningless suffering on the innocent. And that is how Lysanian, despite its advanced knowledge in arts, music and liberal education system, is still being haunted by its past shadow. Remember the Kreis Syracusa, the one that was overwritten by the Witch King and then became an independent nation? That is our next stop. Ah, what a beautiful afternoon, sitting outside a restaurant, drinking wine, eating pasta, appreciating the opera performance on the street, not to mention the sweet dessert waiting to be served afterwards. What could possibly go wrong in such a sophisticated nation where the infected aren't discriminated against, and the only thing sharper than your fork is... Welcome to Syracusa, where the mafia doesn't just influence the government, it is the government. The streets run red with Mariana sauce. Oh, wait, never mind. No, it's blood. Sorry. But don't let that scare you away. Underneath the constant family disputes, extortion, and friendly reminders to pay up on time, Syracusa is a vibrant cultural hotspot. Historians, however, would argue that Syracusan culture is the result of constant influence from foreign nations. The elegant opera performance is a direct cultural heritage from Lysanian. You know, when Syracusa was still a Kreis of Lysania. Syracusa's legislation is brought by Columbia. Its tradition of delicious food and the faith in the church came straight from the holy influence of Laterano, so definitely a place worth visiting. Well, as long as you can turn a blind eye on the never-ending conflicts between different mafia families on the street that result in innocent civilians being killed in the crossfire, and Pharaohmoods in the form of wolf. These wolf-like Pharaohmoods love to play a game of battle royale. They have done it for centuries, and they grew so tired of the fighting that they decided to change the rules. Instead of fighting each other, they picked their own mortal champions to fight in their stead. Basically, they have created their own game of fate, just less complicated. All in all, the Syracusa of today is a delicious pasta with thorns grown on it. They have learned the finest aspect of other nations, but what use of the legal system when the hands of the law are tied by an institution in ruins? What use does having faith in the church do if people keep dying when being killed? What reason is there to keep making pasta when the nation that praised chocolate pasta no longer exists? Okay, the last one was a joke. They should keep cooking those pastas. Well, things weren't always like this. At the beginning, Syracusa was a simple tribe. They and the Lysanian tribes had troubles dealing with their friendly neighbors. So to be able to defend themselves from their neighbors, they proposed to join forces with Lysanian tribes. Through a long negotiation process, Lysanian tribes decided to make the Syracusan tribe a part of their Reich, and thus Syracusa has become a part of Lysanian, not just officially, but also bound by the 𝙀🙤🙀🙧🙀 Gesetzarts. What Syracusa didn't expect was the social hierarchy they experienced through the next century. They were treated like the backwater cousins, good enough to fight on the front line, but not good enough to get a seat at the cool kids table. They were seen as sword-swinging barbarians. Even after picking up Lysanian instruments and fine-tuning their artistic taste, they never quite shocked that whole primitive stereotype, basically second-class citizens. Dissatisfaction grew stronger over the years, and eventually the people of the Syracusa Kreis started protesting. They wanted to become independent. This of course was not taken lightly by the other Kreise, and they sent their forces to quench the unrest, which actually made it worse. Eventually the protests spread around the entire Kreis of Syracusa and evolved into a civil war. It was said that Syracusa Kreis has passed the point of no return, if it were not for the Witch King to step in, rewriting the 𝙀𝙤𝙪𝙧𝙜𝙪 Gazette and officially declaring the independence of Syracusa. And then Syracusa was free from the shackles of their previous masters. Finally they could govern for themselves. They have learned the best aspect of Lithuanian, the appreciation for music and arts. So in the following decades, Syracusa prospered under their new jurisdiction. Nah, just kidding. In the capital, someone decided to practice a little terrorism by blowing up the entire building, killing every governing head present, leaving Syracusa as a nation without its government. And you know when that happened? Literally 2 days after the declaration of their independence. And then, total anarchy. Syracusa was split into multiple mafia families who treated the nation like a giant monopoly board. Only instead of buying real estate they blew those up and annexed entire cities. I mean, why bother building a government when you can just let the 12 most powerful mafia families run the show? This whole bombing and killing each other lasted, wait for it, it lasted 70 years. 70 years of constant backstabbing, gang wars, and all sorts of violent activities that resulted in the suffering of the common folk. Most people were forced to join one of the mafia gangs to gain protection and to somewhat live a normal life. Well, for Syracusans, normal was something else. Back in the days, as long as you didn't get shot on the street, anything can be considered normal. That is until Signora Cecilia stepped in. Signora Cecilia was like, alright, this whole burn everything to the ground thing is getting a bit old. How about we, stop killing each other for a change? Having finished her studies abroad in Laterano, because when the mafia is running your country, naturally you go study at Terra's Vatican for the holy experience. Cecilia came back and decided to play peacemaker. How? Well, she introduced a new system called Pistole e Ordine, guns and order. Sounds cozy, right? Cecilia didn't just convince the mafia to stop shooting each other every 5 minutes, she established a functional, semi-functional government. She even used the power of religion to help unite them. Like, if Jesus says we should stop murdering each other, then who are we to argue? Of course, if you didn't listen, she could still make you disappear in about 5 seconds. After 70 years of constant anarchy, Syracusa finally started to have some resemblance of peace. Sure, it's a fragile peace held together by bribes, shady deals, and occasional assassinations. But hey, we're just here for the past abilities, and for the next 60 years things have been stable, especially now that you have got the Confederate Council and Supreme Court. Although both are basically just puppets for Cecilia's mafia-backed regime, so technically even a gavel strike can end a life. But hey, at least they pretend to care about civilian safety now. Of course, not every faction inside Syracusa is satisfied with this peaceful system. New generations who think maybe the mafia shouldn't run everything, or maybe we should build a society where people don't get shot on broad daylight. What radicals, am I right? The Cecilia family eventually expanded its own business all across Terra, primarily in Colombia, because the smuggling was making them a ton of cash. Well, until the Colombian government took the matter a bit more seriously. The most prominent mafia clan, the Texas family, got wiped out due to being too unruly there, and that is when most of the Syracusan families returned back to their homeland. And that is pretty much where we are now. So would I recommend a visit to Syracusa? Absolutely, because the food is simply to die for. Our next stop is a pretty cold place, and it will take a bit until we arrive there. So in the meantime, why don't we have a little history lesson about a nation from the past, introducing the Gaulish Empire. If you ever look up Gaulish people in a search engine, you might have seen obscure results, such as why are Gaulish people so gay, so cringe, or so full of themselves, or bad at Victorian tongue. Don't be fooled by these misinformations. Haters don't want you to know, but Gaul used to be the superpower on Terra. Back in the days, it was the nation of the Liberis, bird people. Gaul was known for their cultural influence and overwhelming military strength. Gaul was also the only nation in the Terran heartland that was able to withstand the Nightmoran invasions, and they kept expanding their borders by annexing neighboring city-states. They were the undisputed ruling nation, which was also why all the other neighbors even adopted their tongue. Basically, everyone spoke French. I know, right? Hellish time for those neighbors, worse than catastrophe and suffering from oropathy. Gaul's most important feat was achieved at the height of the Gallic era. Yes, the era was literally named after their nation. They put 𝙀𝙤𝙪𝙧𝙜𝙪𝙞𝙀, their capital city, on a ginormous mobile plate, which was powered by Morozhenoe, and thus the first nomadic city was born. It was the beginning of a new era for the Terran civilization. Other nations were elated by this revelation, and thus 𝙀𝙀𝙪𝙧𝙜𝙪𝙀𝙀 was coined, capital of Terra. This sparked the renaissance of Gaulish art, economic growth, and last but not least, their territorial expansion. However, Gaul's aggressive expansionism ultimately led to its own downfall under Emperor Croissant I. Oh, sorry, I read it wrong. His name is Corsica I, not Croissant. Anyway, he realized that after all these years of steady growth and expansionism, the nation has reached an all-time high. This all sounds pretty good for everyone. However, he and the head of the state were able to foresee a slow but inevitable decline of Gaulish influence. Due to the growing resentment and steady development of other superpowers, Ursus is aggressively expanding its territory and was about to start its 10th campaign on Casimirs. Victoria has started a cruel trend by claiming unfathomable amount of land. Other nations felt the FOMO and followed suit. You might know it under the name of colonialism. One of Victoria's most successful colony being Columbia, simply because of its rich originium sources and rare occurrence of catastrophes, and Iberia was experiencing its golden age with their advanced fleet and new technology from the ocean. And this was the position Gaul was in the middle of, so they cooked a strategy. First, they made sure their biggest rival would think twice before invading Gaul by supporting the independence of Columbia, which made Victoria very furious, and they tried everything in their power to prevent the independence. Ultimately, Victoria failed to prevent the independence of Columbia. Iberia does not pose any real threat to Gaul, since they are more into exploring the ocean and bullying Victoria at naval warfare. Like they say, the enemy of your enemy is your friend. Ursus at that time had their hands full dealing with Casimirs, so Gaul planned out their next step to keep their grip on the power. They needed to unify their people, and to do so, they needed a common enemy, a nation no one would help if being invaded. They took Lithuanian on their side and sent out envoys to give outrageous requests, which resulted in the envoys turning into statues. Now that we have discussed this historical part from the point of view of Gaul, I can say that it was all intended. They knew their proposal was bound to cause Lithuanian to react aggressively, especially under the Witch King's rule. So that is when the Gallo-Lithuanian War broke out. Gaul was absolutely sure that no other nation would assist Lithuanian, until the Witch King participated in the war personally and showed Gaul what a real aura looked like. That is when the other two superpowers noticed the decline of Gaul. They acted accordingly and officially declared war on them. Both Victoria and Ursus joined forces to assist Lithuanian. What can I say? What was supposed to be a one-sided, swift war turned into a world war that is known as the War of the Four Nations. Gaul lost the war in the end and paid the heaviest price by being disintegrated. Majority of the war spoils were being taken by the Ursus Empire. Victoria, on the other hand, took the vast land of Gaul as well as its capital, and from that day onward, 𝙀𝙀𝙪𝙧𝙜𝙪𝙀𝙀 was renamed to Londinium. And this act made Victoria the new leading nation on Terra, and Gaul will forever be seen as a superpower from the past, their subject now spread across Terra, still trying to restore their once great nation. And we have arrived at our destination. Welcome to Kjerag. It is a nation that was built by a pharaoh in the past, which is why the inhabitants of this place are pretty religious. After all, what better way to show your faith than naming your own country after the pharaoh itself? Kjerag a place encircled by snowy mountains, mostly known for being an introverted nation that uphold their traditional customs even in this modern age. I do have great news. Recently Kjerag has opened up. What was just a boring collection of tribes is becoming a new tourist destination. Even though Kjerag has opened up for tourism, visiting them still feels like we are the tourist attraction and not the other way around. I guess we still need to break the ice. Also, this is probably the only snowy place that is suitable for a vacation. You ask me why? I don't know, maybe because the other snowy place grows rootless flowers, has weird pitch black snow and ursine KGB units trying to kill you. In Kjerag, the only thing you need to be wary of is the cold environment that might pose some danger. Don't get yourself frozen, it would lead to slipping and falling into a hole. Trust me, this kind of thing occurs on a regular basis, even to locals. Anyway, overall Kjerag is a very peaceful nation. You can tell that by looking through its history. Literally nothing happens for centuries on end, and they never bothered developing either. Why would they, when this place is so peaceful and no other nation has any interest because it is so cold and isolated? This place really started to embrace the outside world after a shift of power. You see, Kjerag is ruled by 3 clans, the Browntails, the Palaroaches and the Silver Ashes. Both Browntails and Palaroaches are conservatives, while the Silver Ashes are the only clan that has contact with the outside world. Fast forward a few centuries, you'd think Kjerag would have enjoyed some peaceful isolations, right? Well, not quite. See, while the rest of the world was out there inventing things like industry, Olafur Silver Ash, the patriarch of the Silver Ashes, decided it was high time Kjerag jumped on the modernization bandwagon. Why stay in the mountains making religious artifacts when you can build factories and railways? Especially the railways, they really needed to build a strong economy. Luckily, he had some connections to the Victorian Empire, which gave him the idea to model the whole country on Victorian business management. A classic foreign influence for better profits move. But the Browntails and the Palaroaches hated the idea. I mean, Olafur wanted railways to be built. Railways on this sacred land? On the holy land of Kjerag? They plotted an assassination on Olafur, and through a complicated political game, Olafur died in a train accident. How ironic, he always wanted more of those. The 2 conservative factions pushed the blame to a family that was allied with the Silver Ashes and claimed that they betrayed them, and also ostracized the Silver Ash family from the tri-clan governing system. They said the death of their head was a punishment from Kjerag. If I were born in Kjerag, I'd actually believed in that shit. The whole incident made Kjerag more isolated than before. That was until one man returned after studying abroad. Because that's what future leaders always do. They leave their nation in chaos behind to find enlightenment from the outside world and bring their teachings back for salvation. And Sioda Silver Ash returned from his internship in Victoria. He pushed modernization and foreign trade. He even had the balls to mine near Mount Carlin. It is considered one of the most sacred places in Kjerag. Naturally, the conservatives were not thrilled. Tensions boiled over when the great elder of the Bier court was poisoned and both sides prepared for civil war. But before blood could be spoiled, Anya, the saintess, descended from Mount Carlin and created a miracle which halted the fighting. In the end, the clans unified under her rule, with the Silver Ashes securing their victory, while Kjerag publicly spun the whole affair as a peaceful resolution. I know all of this sounds very coincidental and unexplained, not to mention the perfect timing of Anya turning the tide and preventing a full-scale civil war. Well, it was all thanks to their Fairmood goddess Kjerag, who actually never left Kjerag. Ever since she disappeared, she has been on incognito mode, observing by working as a part-time housemaid in the High Priest's palace. And with new people coming into power, there will be new agendas, and one of those agendas is to build a weapon factory, establishing trade with foreign nations so that Kjerag can finally participate in the global economy. They started importing tons of metals and other resources from their friendly neighbor, Victoria. Throughout this journey, I have mentioned the nation Victoria a handful of times already, and now it is time to finally have a proper introduction. Mostly populated by felines with a strong British accent, check.
known for their past colonialism that influenced countless other nations, check. Was once the world-dominating superpower on Terra, check. Is now on decline because of its complex political altercations, which is killing the nation from the inside, check. My dear visitor, welcome to the Victorian Empire, the carbon copy of today's United Kingdom, but with more inequality, competitive racism against the infected, game-changing colonialism, offensive place names, last but not least, a big gap between the common folk and the nobles. Victoria stands as one of the nations with the most profoundly impactful history, a legacy so vast and far-reaching that one would be hardly pressed to find any other nation with such cultural influence, military might, or dare I say, sheer bloody-mindedness. So, let's commence forth on this marvelous journey through its splendid historical importance. Pardon for my Victorian tongue. Before Victoria became an empire, there was this fertile region devoid from dangerous beasts and catastrophes. One day, a tribe of ancient Dracos discovered this place and saw the potential of it. They decided to call this place their new home. Over the next few decades, other nomadic tribes and settlers joined their party. Now, let's be clear, this wasn't a real nation at that time yet. It was more like a big campsite village run by the Dracos, who were still doing nomadic things. This kind of semi-nomadic lifestyle didn't last long until it became old-fashioned, so the people wanted a change, which resulted in a dispute of different lifestyles. There were two Draco houses representing the two opposing lifestyles. One of them wanted to follow the trend of monarchy with a clear social hierarchy and imperial rules. Back in that era, it was a trend for nations to be established like that, because Sargon, the superpower at that time, was structured with a monarchy ruling over its common folk. You know, the old time when slavery and peasants working for the nobles was trendy. On the other hand, the opposing Draco house wanted to keep their nomadic lifestyle. Now, this could have gone the usual route of bash each other with rocks until one's leader dies a brutal death. But no, surprisingly, the Dracos decided to split in peace. The monarchists took a nice fertile valley and said, hey, we are a kingdom now, let's call it Victoria. While the conservatives kept their nomadic lifestyle and wandered through the land until they found a region fit to settle, which will be named Tara by the future generations. Both houses lived peacefully for a few decades until they entered the Common Era. Remember the Kagan and his boys? That's right, they also decided to invade the two Victorian kingdoms to fulfill their coming-of-age practice. And like any other overambitious big brother, Victoria decided that protecting Tara was in both houses' best interest. But it really meant annexing Tara. The official record written in flowery Victorian handwriting claimed it was all like a tea party. But actually, Tara was taken over by force. Of course, this did not suit the Draco House of Tara, so take a guess what Victoria's solution was. Force Tara's ruling family to bend their knees, but keep their fancy titles. Because, you know, paperwork is hard. The king of Tara got renamed and was told to be happy with his nobility. I'm sure that went over really well. But hey, now Victoria is reunited after all this bloodshed and sacrifice, so it was all worth it. There is no way it would turn into a future conflict from the inside, and for the next few centuries the Victoria Empire was ruled by the Draco houses peacefully. However, all of this changed when the House of Cards in Sargon fell, which triggered a massive purge on their ruling race, the Aslan. Not a single family member was spared, even distant relatives were targeted. One noble family of the Aslan house managed to flee from Sargon and requested the Victorian royal house for shelter. And as we have established, the monarchy system of Victoria was a carbon copy from Sargon, so in a way, the Draco House were admirers of the Sargon Empire. With open arms, they welcomed the Aslan family into their royal house as permanent guests. I mean, what could they do to harm the Victorian Empire, right? They're just a bunch of glorified felines who lost their entire livelihood and most of their family members at home. They are just the nice guests at the dinner table. They wouldn't take over the throne, right? Over the next few years, the Aslans became extremely popular among the Victorian common folk because the Aslans were a family of chads. They treated people with respect and helped the poor.
In other words, foreign deeds for the Draco house, and with the people on the Aslan's side, they started a palace coup against the Victorian Dracos, which succeeded without much resistance. The Tara house on the other hand decided to resist, but ultimately signed a double monarchy rule agreement with the Aslan house, and from that day onward, both the Draco house and the Aslan house ruled Victoria together peacefully. That is, if we can count out all the political power games and conspiracies constantly happening in the background. In any way, the Aslans brought an age of peace and prosperity, and everything developed during that period. The Victorians were the first to establish the wide usage of orogenium crystal, starting the Industrial Revolution of the Crystallization Age. They quadrupled their factory production, created an abundance of jobs, school-educated the masses, and they built railways for faster transportation throughout the nation. They were finally able to travel through all the places with ridiculous names: Twat, Dick Place, Cockmouth, Penis Stone, Shitterton, County Hillcock. Oh hey, look, that's Londinium. It was like Victoria was just figuring out how to turn their people into more efficient cogs in a massive economic machine. That good old 19th century industrial charm where everyone's a child laborer and your lungs are slowly turning into soot. But on Terra, people just got infected and got oropathy, which was definitely not the best way to live in Victoria, but hey, they had prosperity. This era was called the Victorian era. Thanks to all the industrialization, Victoria has slowly become one of the superpower that even nations like Gaul had to consider a serious rival. Classic French versus England lore. And that is when Victoria invented something out of the ordinary. They called it colonialism. It is when you claim a foreign land yours and start exploiting its resources, often in the name of Victoria or the betterment of uncivilized people, even if the locals didn't ask for it. I mean, what are they gonna do about it, right? Victoria got big cannons, endless supply of army, and tea. And I haven't even mentioned the Steam Knights. Imagine an orogenium-powered cattle that can shoot out missiles and has one of the strongest physical attacks known to man, condensed into a thick power armor. Now imagine it being piloted by the most patriotic soldier. That is what one Steam Knight is made of. They are tasked to take orders directly from the parliament's aristocrats to protect the king and the country. These heavily armored fellows look pretty big, but do not confuse mass with imprecision and sluggishness. Steam Knights have extremely high reactions and accuracy in hitting their targets. Combined with their thick and heavy armor, they are pretty much unstoppable once they have locked in. But it doesn't stop there. These Steam Knights can also leap into the air and perform a freaking Gundam attack. Throughout history, the Steam Knights have been proven to be Victoria's strongest military assets. Their war efforts have been engraved into legends and folktales. Fast forward a few decades, colonies of Victoria could be found everywhere. If a plot of land can hold a boot, then it should belong to Victoria, was a famous Victorian saying from that period of time. And as you might have guessed, the colonists weren't seen as equals to Victoria. The constant mistreatment over the years made the biggest colony, Columbia, revolt against its own master. Victoria took the matters extremely seriously and sent their fleet to stop the civil unrest. Funny enough, the independence movement was in the interest of Gaul, so they sent Columbia direct military aid and turned the simple civil unrest into an actual full-scale war. Thanks to Columbia's smart strategy and Gaul's direct support, Columbia was able to win the war and declare its independence. Victoria had to accept it because of its own affairs it had to deal with at home. Imagine losing to your own colony only because of foreign interference. The Victorian royal house was furious about this matter, but right after the Columbian Declaration of Independence, Rimbilliton also jumped out of the line and declared their independence, which Victoria also failed to suppress. And to make matters worse, Victoria just lost a major naval war against Iberia, losing a large portion of their warships. However, despite all of this, it did not deter Victoria from wanting to become the world-dominating empire. Despite all the previous loss, the Victorian Empire kept inserting their geopolitical might to gain influence. They basically bullied smaller nations, mostly in the name of peace and security, like leading the Grand Crusade against Kazdel simply by declaring them as the biggest threat of all Terran inhabitants. Let's be xenophobic. It's really in this year. Let's find a nasty Sarkas tribe, those infected horde to fear. There's no more fiendish neighbors since the Steam Knights came to call. Let's learn to love our empire by purging one and all. We know we ought to hate them, they're different, you see. We've read of all their sins in history and decree. The folks that fought in Kazdel told us how it's got to be. The gospel truth was forged in wars that we declare as free. Let's wipe out their last stronghold. They're better off oppressed. We'll serve them up a genocide they never will forget. The first catastrophe proved that they're a dangerous lot. So it is our duty to take them down, destroy the plot. You see, Sarkas can never be as good as felines here. We're noble and industrious, the best on Terrasphere. So step aside, Sarkas, we are ready for your worst. We know you try to raid us, enslave us or degrade us, or slaughter us and invade us, unless we crush you first. For the following years, Victoria only picked small bones because of the previous major losses they tanked. It was only during the Gaul-Lithanian War that they noticed the decline of Gaul. So, to take political revenge on Gaul, they allied themselves with Ursus and Lithanian. As we know, the war resulted in an absolute victory and the end of Gaul. You helped my colony rebel? I'm gonna fuck your whole country from behind. Victoria took over the majority of Gaul's fertile land and officially claimed to be the new dominant nation, leading to a new era of peace and prosperity for the next few decades. But this era of prosperity didn't last long. A slow decline was happening in the background. While the royal house burned cash like coal, the wars were dragging on. Spoils were not split evenly. The rich were getting richer and the poor were getting poorer. The situation came to a peak when their king tried to raise the tax for the aristocrats. The aristocrats responded by losing their collective minds. They didn't just refuse, they decided to whip up a popular uprising. That's right, the rich folks got the peasants to overthrow the king. He was promptly executed, publicly hanged in his own royal garden. Don't ask me how. The aristocrats somehow did an Uno reverse card on their majesty and made the people of Victoria think he was the reason why their nation is on the decline. And with the king gone, the 8 dukes, Victoria's regional governors, gathered inside Londinium, you know, to fill the power vacuum. In other words, to take over Victoria for themselves. And if you think this was already dirty enough, get ready for what they did next. These dukes passed some new laws, making sure that no other noble could waltz into Londinium without special permission. It was a power move, plain and simple. They wanted to make sure that no one else could challenge their grip on the empire. But hold your tea, this wasn't the worst thing. As we all know, bad leaders create bad times, and bad times create dangerous political agendas. Remember the Tarrants? The ones forcefully assimilated into Victoria Kingdom centuries ago and then were never treated equally? Yeah, they remember too. These Terra nationalists, or pro-Draco monarchists if you prefer, are still clinging to that dream of independence like it is their last shred of dignity, and they have been preparing for revolt for a very, very long time. The moment anyone from Victoria tries to tell them otherwise, it is pretty much Victorian detected, opinion rejected. Expect them to throw a ton of stones at Victorian soldiers too. They absolutely hate being suppressed by Victoria and have had just about enough of being treated like second-class citizens. Actually, that is still not the worst thing. Yep, it gets even worse. One of the dukes tried to take over the parliament in Londinium. This act made the other dukes anxious, so they came up with a brilliant solution. Instead of working together to prevent the success of the coup, they hired external mercenaries. Let me tell you, the gun they hired were not small. It was big guns, the Kazdelian military commission to be exact. These Kazdel mercs were hired to restore order in Londinium. You heard that right. They hired Kazdel mercenaries, the same Kazdel whose homeland Victoria torn apart in the past. This is like hiring the guy you just beat to the ground to help you clean up your own house. Surely nothing could go wrong, right? I mean, hey, the Kazdel military commission did wipe out the rebels. They just went a step further by stabbing the dukes who hired them in the back and taking over Londinium for themselves. They then threw quite a big party because they brought a lot of Sarkas tribes along the way, and while they had the Victorian factories and technologies with them, they built one of the most terrifying weapons Terra has ever seen, the Shard. Not to be confused with the real Shard airport in London. This one is an airship capable of creating artificial catastrophes from a safe distance. And with that, we are back in the present. The Victoria of today, a nation with rich history, but is now only a shadow of its former glory. They have lost pretty much everything. The belief of their citizens have been trampled for years by the dukes and merchants. Now that the king is gone, the nobles are no longer unified under one ideology. Of course, it was never really unified in the first place, but ever since the Londinium crisis, this problem has been out of control. Their feared military has become a myth and legend because they themselves abandoned their most powerful allies, so no one came to save during such a crisis. Now, it is a nation that can't run its own capital city and doesn't even have a leader. Now, I know what you are dying to ask. Is Victoria still worth visiting? Well, let's consider the facts. If you want to take a nice stroll down the street in Londinium, let me warn you, these streets might not be safe. You might end up meeting a Taran loyalist. To avoid being questioned about your political stance, you have to be dressed like a Taran. Then again, the likelihood to meet a Victorian patriot is also pretty high. In that case, expect a nice beating from them. But wait, what if you dressed like you support Victoria? Then you will get knifed by Taran nationalists from every direction. You might just stay inside, but then you will get kidnapped by the Sarkas and they will send you to their forced labor camp. Not because they are racist or anything. Oh wait, never mind, they are kinda racist. Let's not just talk about the people. Let's also take a glance at the architecture of the city. Don't forget that Londinium is Terra's oldest nomadic city. In other words, the city is of huge historical significance with a lot of old buildings. Some of those buildings and pillars are a little bit too brittle, so don't try to push those, you might accidentally kill some innocent felines. And how could I forget the constant artillery bombardments? Those gigantic cannons on Londinium's thick and impenetrable wall are perfectly positioned facing inwards. Yeah, that's because the Kazdelian mercs took over those, and they have been firing bombshells after bombshells to get rid of the internal conflicts. They don't even care if their own people fall victim to these attacks. And if you were hoping for some peace and quiet outside of the capital, I got some bad news for you. The reed fields out there look pretty, right? You better tell that to the Tara nationalists. So, all facts considered, you should probably not visit Victoria at this current stage. We sadly missed its peak when it was still cool to take a visit and study there. With that being said, we have traveled through half of Terra, and I gotta say, this has been quite a journey so far. Exploring the history of so many nations, from the militaristic might of Ursus to the isolated but peaceful Kjerag, from the corporate-driven technocratic Casimirs to the classical music enthusiastic Lithanian, and the once mighty but now fractured Victoria, each place we visited offers a unique blend of triumphs and tragedies, reflecting the ups and downs of their history. However, as we have traveled through all these places, I think it was evident that the shadows often overshadow the light. Casimir's radiant glow of modernism blinding us from looking through its dark facade, just like Lungmen's cultural vibrancy being displayed in front of its city underbelly. The bad often lurks just beneath the surface. The exploitation of the infected in Rimbilliton reveals a grim reality of commodification and expendability of the workforce, while Ursus with its brutal military expansion highlights a history steeped in expansionism and power. The lavish lifestyle of nobles has always been a stark contrast with the peasants all across Terra, and in all of these exploitations, it is always the same groups of people who get victimized, the infected and the common folk. Now, I know it all sounds doom and gloom, so why would anyone even want to get into the lore? Well, I think I'm not speaking only for myself when I say I'm kind of a masochist. Oh wait, I am? Okay, anyway. Amidst this bleak world lies a certain fascination. I think the lore of Arknights is, in a way, resonating with us. It makes us want to delve even further into its narrative of suffering, tragedy and redemption, whether through the epic tales of entire nations or the intimate struggle of individual character. The emotional depth of this world captivates us. Maybe it is this complexity that kept us delving deeper. Or maybe it is because of its blend of despair and resistance that reflects our own experience. I think it goes without saying that a lot of Terra's history has similarities with our world. Man, when lore writers start copying from each other. The infected, just like any other minority groups in our society, endure systematic injustice, their difficulties often overlooked in favor of those in power and rich. The history of Terra is littered with examples of nobility evading crimes, where the infected and poor suffered under it, and this really makes one think. It really confronts one with the uncomfortable truth about our reality. The struggles of the weak are often ignored in the face of the powerful. Well, we reap what we sow. A reminder that the consequences of our actions shape the world around us. Despite the widespread suffering, we challenge ourselves to resist our own satisfaction and gain. Does our hope have to be sown upon somebody's sorrow? We have a choice: to confront the monsters we have created, or to become passive observers in a world that feels like hell on earth. And with that being said, I truly wish people can come together to achieve bigger things, because the only people benefiting from conflicts are those who sit at the top. If the people on Terra cannot unite as one, then there is no hope in resolving the inevitable apocalypse, which will be the second half of our journey. We will be taking a stroll into the deep, looking at a threat that might flood the entirety of Terra, a looming threat from the north that even the knowledge of it can pose danger. Of course, we will also visit the most advanced nation on Terra, and at last, we will gaze upon the stars. This has been the first part of Arknights All Nations Explored, and I will see you in the next one.